Hey everyone, this is Lomi, and today I'm working on one of the heads I made for Rune, who is the first ball-jointed doll I've sculpted, and is one of the main characters of my fantasy book series. If you're new to my work, I've shared a lot about this project on my channel across the past few years. This particular head was a cast that had a lot of bubbles and pitting and needed complete resurfacing, so I modified it into a closed-eye or sleeping head and then airbrushed it to match the doll's body. As a result of the heavy airbrushing, this head has a slight sheen to it that the others don't, but hopefully that will vanish as I get a few layers of paint, blushing, and more sealant on it. As it is, he's been sealed 3 times using Vallejo matte varnish, which I apply with my airbrush. The airbrush I use is an Iwata Eclipse HPCS, which is my second airbrush, and I absolutely love it. As is usual for me, I start with my line work, doing eyelashes and eyebrows using gouache paint, which I love because it makes it so easy to correct mistakes using just water. That's extremely important for a doll like this that's been fully airbrushed, because I have to be sure removing mistakes won't remove any of the paint, or I'd have to strip this all the way down to primer and start over from scratch. I previously shared part of the process of painting one of the open-eyed heads that I cast of this sculpt, and I found that the many layers of paint gave this head a very different texture, so the lines for the lashes and brows went on much more easily, and they turned out really beautifully smooth. I'm sticking to my long bristled brush today, which is a Winstonia Berry Wine nail art brush, and for cleaning up mistakes I use my silver Camlin Pro to touch up the really fine lines, and one of my Reaper detail brushes for larger mistakes. I have his other head sitting nearby, and I'll show it at the end, but right now I just have it handy to use for reference as I work on this one, so I can try to make sure this version of him at least sort of resembles the other one that's already done. When I'm done with the line work, I seal it with my airbrush and then move on to blushing using powdered chalk pastels. I was really happy with the line work, so naturally I had to do something to mess it up, and what I did today was change the brand of pastels I'm using. The open-eyed face-up was done with Mungyo pastels, and I absolutely loved how they looked, but the sticks are incredibly tiny and I knew I was going to need a lot of powder to make the blushing show up on the more tanned skin tone this doll has, so I didn't want to use it all up right away. While I was cleaning, I found a little box of full-sized schmink pastels I purchased several years ago, and I noticed the terracotta pastel in the box was really similar to the terracotta pastel in the Mungyo box, and there was a brown that was really close to what I was using for the brows. So I decided to use the big schmink pastels instead, completely forgetting the fact that I absolutely hate these pastels for face-ups and had buried them in a drawer for a reason. I've seen a lot of people use these pastels for face-ups really successfully, and I have never been able to replicate that success. I don't know if I've just had bad luck with the color palettes I tend to use or what, but there's one major problem with these pastels that makes them frustrating for me. No matter what I do, the colors are always very clumpy. They just don't powder well, which means you get great coverage in pastel drawings, but the color doesn't go onto dolls smoothly. The first time I used them, I thought it was my method of powdering the pastel that was the problem, but I have ultimately determined that it's just the nature of these pastels and how they behave. Lighter colors in particular aren't as bad, probably because they tend to contain more plain chalk, which makes them more dry in consistency and lets them turn into a really fine dust. But when you get into the darker or more saturated colors, they aren't so forgiving. The end result of the pastels not powdering well is that when I try to blend them into the toothy sealant, the larger particles in the powder break apart, giving me really blotchy, streaky, uneven colors. You can see there's a huge difference in how the terracotta I'm using for the skin tone blushing behaves in contrast to the lilac and pink tones I use around the lower eye and the lips. The pink and the lilac I'm using are still from the Mungyo box, and while they go on incredibly smoothly because they made a really fine and soft powder, I have to fight a lot with the blending of the browns. Another issue I frequently encounter with the Schmink pastels is, when I get a patch that goes on blotchy, I'll work to blend it until it appears to have a relatively smooth look, but as soon as I spray it with sealant and it gets wet, more of those large particles dissolve and create new blotches and streaks that are then sealed into the face-up, and they can't be removed. The brown I use for the brows is also pretty clumpy, and you can see in a few places that it had a lot of fallout when I tried to apply it, but at least that one blended pretty smoothly. I've tried a lot of different methods for powdering these pastels and have never been able to get any of them to work for me. I've scraped the pastels across various grits of sandpaper, I've tried grinding stones, I've rubbed them on paper and picked up the loose dust, I've tried rubbing a brush directly on the unpowdered pastel, and I've also tried drawing a razor over the edge, which works amazingly for my low Cornell and Mungyo pastels, but not so much for these. No matter what I tried, I always have blotchiness with the bolder colors. In the end, I think these high-intensity pastels are probably a safer bet for occasional drawings for me, and I'll stick to the others for face-ups. It's just a shame because at $5 per pastel, they're a really expensive material to just set aside. I added details to his lips with my Arteza watercolored pencils and my Camlin Pro brush dipped in water, which let me smooth out and soften the lines just a little. I alternated layers of blushing and pencil and gave the cheeks and jaw one last attempt at smoothing them out, but it was pretty well fruitless. Trying to get the blushing to go on smoothly was incredibly frustrating, but at some point I decided I would just use it as kind of a rough-in for what I want, and I'll figure out a way to easily repair the parts I can't live with. It's definitely darker and not as smooth around the nose and mouth as what I wanted, but I can tolerate that difference better than I can deal with the uneven color on the cheeks and jaw. Between the two heads, the open-eyed head turned out a lot smoother and closer to what I wanted, but I think there's hope for the closed-eye one yet. I think the best solution is going to be to mix a new color match and airbrush over the worst parts, then just start blushing those areas over from scratch. It'll be a headache, but at least I won't have to strip and completely repaint the head. And this time around, I'll be sure to use the pastels that I know give me good results. That's all for today though. Thanks for watching. Bye.